Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. This time, it's into the world of lie detection. You've given us some really cool sources for this one. We've got psychology studies, and we've even got stories about master con artists. It's all here. So I guess what we're going to try to do today is figure out how to make you a human lie detector.
You know, it's funny. When most people think about lie detection, they think about polygraph tests, right? But they're not really as reliable as people think.
Yeah, you always see those in the movies, like
Yeah.
someone's strapped in and they're all sweaty and, the needles are going crazy. But so I guess what you're saying is that they're not really foolproof.
No, not at all. They're basically measuring your physiological responses, like how much you're sweating or your heart rate, stuff like that. But those things can be triggered by just being stressed out or anxious. You don't even have to be lying.
Oh, so like you could be totally innocent but still fail a polygraph just because you're, nervous about the whole situation.
Exactly. It's called the Othello error, actually. Basically, mistaking any sign of stress for a sign of guilt. In fact, one of the sources you gave tells a story about a guy named Roger Keith Coleman. He was wrongly convicted of murder and actually failed a polygraph, most likely, because of the immense stress of facing execution, which is, understandable.
Wow, that's pretty heavy. So it seems like if we can't always trust machines to tell us the truth, how do we actually get better at spotting deception ourselves?
Well, it's all about understanding the psychology of lying.
Yeah.
And there are 5 main principles that we're going to go through today. They're all based on how liars change their behavior.
Okay, cool. So let's dive into those principles. The first one you mentioned was behavioral change. What exactly does that mean? Like, how does that work with lie detection?
So it all comes down to establishing a baseline. Imagine, a detective who's watching a suspect and, figuring out their routine. You need to know what's normal for them to know what's off.
So, like, if I know someone who's usually really talkative and then they get really quiet when we talk about a certain thing, that could be like a red flag.
Yeah, exactly. And one of your sources actually talks about this. There's an anecdote about a judge who claimed he could spot liars just by how they walked into the courtroom. It's pretty wild. Think about it. Say you're in a meeting and you've been watching how your colleague normally acts. How could you use this idea of behavioral change to figure out if they're being honest during, say, a really important discussion?
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess I'd be looking for any changes in like how they act, especially if there's a lot at stake. Okay, so what about the second principle? You called it the 3 emotions. So how do emotions actually play into lying?
Well, you see, liars try to hide their emotions, but they're not that good at it. They often leak out in subtle ways. I mean, we all associate lying with fear, right? Like the fear of getting caught. And that can show up as, blinking a lot or their voice getting higher or even stuttering.
Yeah, that makes sense. But you also mentioned guilt and joy. I'm not really sure how those fit in.
Well, guilt can look like, sadness. Maybe they're avoiding saying I, or their body is angled away from you. It's kind of like their conscience is betraying them. And then, believe it or not, some people actually enjoy lying. Like they get a thrill out of it. They might, smirk when it's not appropriate or be overly confident.
So if someone's like a little too eager to give you an alibi or they seem, a bit too smug about their explanation, that could be a sign.
Exactly. And here's a little trick you can try. Try to, raise the stakes of the conversation. Make it feel more important. This can make those hidden feelings even more obvious.
That's clever, like turning up the heat to see what boils over. So disharmonies is the third principle. What's that all about?
Okay, picture this. Someone tells you, I'm so happy for you, but their face is telling a completely different story. That's what we call a disharmony. Liars often focus so much on their words that they forget about their body language.
So it's about like paying attention to if what they're saying matches up with how they're saying it.
Yep. Look for things like asymmetrical facial expressions. A real smile uses your whole face, but a fake smile might just be the mouth. Timing matters too. A real expression usually comes before the words. A fake one usually comes after. And think about how long the expression lasts. Real emotions fade quickly, but fake ones can kind of linger in a weird way.
This reminds me of that story about Georges Menelescu, that master thief who practiced his lies in front of a mirror to make sure his words and expressions matched up perfectly.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. He knew that to be convincing, everything had to be in sync. Disharmonies are like cracks in that perfect performance. They give you a glimpse of what's really going on underneath.
Wow, so even someone who's really good at lying can be betrayed by those little inconsistencies. That's pretty fascinating. I'm definitely going to be watching out for those now. Okay, so on to the fourth principle. Stress signals. I mean, lying has got to be pretty stressful, right?
Oh, absolutely. Trying to keep up a lie takes a lot of brain power, which can lead to noticeable signs of stress. One of the biggest giveaways is changes in their voice. Their pitch might get higher. They might speak faster or slower than usual, or they might pause a lot.
So, like, if someone who's usually a smooth talker suddenly starts stammering or using a lot of filler words, that could mean they're struggling to keep it together.
That's right. They might also repeat the question you asked, stall with phrases like, oh, let me think about that, or give really vague answers. It's all about buying time and trying to manage all that cognitive load.
Okay, and what about physical signs of stress? Anything specific to watch out for there?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Things like blinking more, fidgeting, touching their face, even going back to old habits like biting their nails or twirling their hair. These can all be signs that they're stressed and potentially that they're lying.
So basically, we're looking for anything that seems out of the ordinary, anything that suggests they're feeling the pressure of maintaining a lie.
Got it. Okay, so last but not least, we have behavioral control.
So is this about how liars sometimes get really stiff and unnatural in their movements?
Exactly. They think that if they control every movement, they won't give themselves away. But this often leads to, not using their hands naturally, having a really stiff posture, and not showing much emotion on their face.
But wouldn't that lack of spontaneity itself be a giveaway? Like, it just seems so unnatural.
It totally is. It's like they're trying so hard not to look like they're lying that they end up looking even more suspicious. Pay attention to how they're speaking, too. They might speak really slowly and carefully, lacking that natural flow and spontaneity that you hear when someone's being truthful.
So if someone who's usually really animated and expressive suddenly becomes all controlled and measured in their speech and movements, that's a bad sign.
Bingo. Those sudden shifts in behavior can be really telling. It's like their carefully constructed persona cracks under the pressure. But remember, while body language is super important, it's not the whole story. We also need to pay attention to what people are actually saying to get the full picture.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've talked a lot about body language, but what about the words themselves? Can the actual content of what someone's saying reveal a lie?
Absolutely. And that's where content analysis comes in. One of the most interesting things I found in your sources was that people who are telling the truth often include details that they don't even fully understand themselves. It's like they're saying, here's this weird piece of information. It doesn't quite make sense to me, but it's part of what happened. Liars tend to avoid doing that. They stick to nice, neat, believable stories.
So if someone's story seems too perfect, too rehearsed, that might be a sign that they're not being completely honest.
Exactly. Another good indicator of truthfulness is the inclusion of specific details, especially sensory details like, what they saw, heard, smelled, even how they felt. Liars have a hard time coming up with these kinds of details because they're so focused on just making up a believable story, not on actually remembering what happened.
Okay, so let me see if I've got this right. If someone tells me they were at a party, but they can't remember anything specific about the music, the food, or even how they felt, it's possible they weren't actually there.
Yeah, it's definitely something to consider. And pay attention to how they describe conversations, too. When people are telling the truth, they often remember details about how things were said, not just what was said. They might remember the tone of voice, the pauses, the inflections. Liars, on the other hand, usually just stick to the basic facts. They miss those subtle but telling details.
It's like they're giving you the headlines instead of the whole story. This whole content analysis thing is adding a whole new dimension to how I think about lie detection.
And keep in mind, all 5 of these principles are connected. They work together to give you a comprehensive framework for understanding and analyzing deceptive behavior. By learning to apply these principles in real-life situations, you can become much better at judging truth and deception.
This has been incredibly insightful. We've covered a lot of ground already, from debunking the polygraph to exploring the 5 principles of deception detection. Before we move on, are there any key takeaways you want our listeners to keep in mind as they continue to develop their lie detection skills?
Well, first and foremost, remember that establishing a baseline of normal behavior is crucial. You need to know what's typical for a person in order to recognize when they're deviating from that norm.
Right. It's like having a reference point. You can't spot the anomalies if you don't know what's standard.
Exactly. And always be on the lookout for inconsistencies. Things like mismatches between words and body language, sudden changes in behavior, gaps or contradictions in their story. These are all potential red flags. And don't be afraid to trust your gut feeling. If something feels off, it probably is.
Yeah, that inner voice can be pretty powerful. But it's also important to remember that context matters. Things like stress, fatigue, cultural differences, even the relationship between people, all of these things can influence behavior.
Absolutely. Just because you see one sign doesn't automatically mean someone is lying. It's about looking at the bigger picture, gathering as much information as possible, and considering all the factors before you make a judgment.
So it's a process of observation, analysis, and careful consideration, not jumping to conclusions based on just one clue.
Exactly. And remember, the goal isn't to become paranoid or suspicious of everyone around you. These principles are tools for understanding human behavior, not weapons for accusation.
Right. We don't want to turn into like human lie detectors who can't trust anyone.
Exactly. It's about developing a discerning eye for deception so you can navigate the world of communication with greater confidence and insight.
This deep dive into lie detection has been absolutely fascinating. We've explored the 5 principles, and I already feel much more equipped to spot those subtle signs of deception. But, of course, there's so much more to uncover.
Yeah, for sure. Next time, we'll dig even deeper into how to counter manipulation tactics, and we'll explore the psychological principles behind persuasion and influence.
So stay tuned for part 2, where we'll continue our exploration of the fascinating world of lie detection. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of lie detection. I mean, we already covered so much, but there's still more to go, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Last time we talked about those 5 principles of deception detection, remember? Behavioral change, the 3 emotions, disharmonies, stress signals, and behavioral control. And then we touched on how analyzing the content of what someone says can also give you clues.
Yeah, it was really interesting to learn how those little things like a vague answer or a sudden subject change could actually mean something, you know? But I'm thinking now, how can we actually use those principles to not just spot lies, but to counter like actual manipulation tactics?
That's a really good question. I mean, we've all met those master manipulators, right? The ones who can just twist things around to get what they want.
Totally.
Yeah.
So how do we protect ourselves from that?
One of the best things you can do is become more aware of your own, vulnerabilities. Like, what are your weaknesses? What buttons can people push to get you to react?
Oh, okay, I get it. Like, for me, I know I'm a sucker for a sob story. So I got to be extra careful when someone tries to play on my emotions like that.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to question everything. Manipulators, they often present things in a way that benefits them, leaving out important details, maybe even twisting facts to fit their agenda.
So we have to be like critical thinkers. We can't just take everything at face value. We got to ask questions, demand proof, and not let those emotional appeals sway us.
That's it. You're taking back control of the conversation, not letting them lead you down their little path of half-truths. Another good tactic is setting boundaries. Manipulators, they love pushing limits. They're always testing to see how far they can go.
It's like they're playing a game, seeing how much they can get away with.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So set those boundaries and stick to them. Be assertive. Let them know you're not going to tolerate their games. And hey, don't be afraid to just walk away if you need to. Sometimes the best way to counter manipulation is to just remove yourself from the situation entirely.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what if you can't just walk away? Like, say, at work or with family?
Well, in those cases, it's super important to recognize their tactics and try to detach yourself from the emotions they're trying to trigger. Like, if you notice they're using guilt or fear to control the conversation, take a step back mentally.
So it's like recognizing it for what it is, not getting caught up in all the drama.
Right. If you can stay calm and focused on the facts, you can disrupt their strategies. And again, trust your gut. If something feels wrong, if their words and actions don't match up with your intuition, pay attention to that.
It's like our internal lie detector going off.
Yeah.
We shouldn't ignore those warning signs.
Exactly. Of course, intuition isn't enough on its own. We have to back it up with observation and careful analysis. But that gut feeling is a valuable first line of defense. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about persuasion and influence.
Hmm.
How can we use those principles not just to detect deception, but to become more persuasive ourselves?
That's an interesting twist. I mean, I think we all want to be more persuasive, right? Whether it's negotiating,
Yeah.
presenting an idea, or even just convincing a friend to try a new restaurant.
Absolutely. And one of the most basic principles of persuasion is reciprocity. The idea is that when someone does something nice for us, we feel like we should do something nice for them in return.
Oh, yeah, the whole you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours thing.
Exactly. So if you want to persuade someone, think about doing something nice for them first. Doesn't have to be big, even just a genuine compliment or a small favor.
So, like building some goodwill, creating that sense of obligation.
Right. Another powerful principle is social proof. We're more likely to be persuaded by something if we see that other people are already doing it, especially people we admire or trust.
Oh, yeah, it's like the power of the crowd. We're more likely to buy a product if we see a bunch of good reviews, right?
Exactly. So highlight how other people have been persuaded by your idea or product. You could use testimonials, endorsements from experts, or even just point out how many people have already adopted your approach.
So it's like showing that you're not alone in your beliefs or actions. You're part of a larger group.
Great. And don't forget about the power of scarcity. People tend to value things more when they think they're rare or in limited supply.
The classic limited time offer trick. It always creates that sense of urgency.
It sure does. So emphasize how scarce your offer is. Point out that there are only a few left, that this deal won't last long, or that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
Yeah, it makes us feel like we're going to miss out, so we act quickly.
Now let's talk about authority. We're more likely to be persuaded by someone we see as an expert or an authority figure. It's why we trust doctors, scientists, and other professionals who have specialized knowledge.
So if we want to be more persuasive, we need to establish our own credibility.
Exactly. Highlight your qualifications, your experience, your track record of success. Show them you're a reliable and trustworthy source of information.
It's about showing that you know what you're talking about.
And finally, never underestimate the power of consistency and commitment. Once we've committed to something, even something small, we're more likely to follow through.
It's like we feel obligated to keep our word, even if it was just like a casual agreement.
Exactly. So start by getting them to agree to something small, something that doesn't require a lot of effort. Once they've taken that first step, they're more likely to agree to bigger things later on.
It's like building momentum. Start with a small push and gradually increase the force. But, it's important to remember that these principles can be used ethically or unethically.
That's a very good point. The goal is to persuade, not to manipulate. To influence, not to coerce. Persuasion should be a two-way street, built on trust, understanding, and presenting your ideas in a way that resonates with the other person's values.
It's about real connection and authentic communication, not just using tricks. Now, I'm really curious about nonverbal communication. I mean, they say body language speaks volumes, right?
It certainly does. Our words carry information, but our nonverbal cues, things like facial expressions, posture, gestures, those often reveal our true feelings and intentions.
It's like those unspoken signals give us a glimpse into what someone's really thinking or feeling.
Let's start with facial expressions. Our faces are incredibly expressive. We can convey so many emotions, joy, sadness, anger, fear.
It's like our faces are mirrors reflecting what's going on inside, sometimes even betraying emotions we're trying to hide.
Take the smile, for example. Not all smiles are created equal. A genuine smile, what we call a Duchenne's smile, uses specific muscles around the eyes, creating crow's feet and a sense of warmth and authenticity. A fake smile, well, it often only involves the mouth. It can look strained or artificial.
It's the crinkles around the eyes that give away a real smile, the kind that comes from the heart.
Another key expression is the eyebrow raise. It can convey surprise, skepticism, or even disapproval. It's a subtle lift that signals doubt, questioning, or even a challenge.
So, like, if someone raises their eyebrows while I'm talking, it could mean they don't believe me.
It's possible. Pay attention to how people raise their eyebrows during conversations. It can tell you a lot about their reactions and thoughts.
It's like they're silently communicating their level of agreement or disagreement. It adds another layer of meaning to what they're saying. What about the eye roll? Everyone knows that one.
Oh yeah, the classic eye roll. It can convey annoyance, contempt, boredom. It's a gesture of dismissal, like they're not impressed or interested. Watch out for eye rolls in conversations. They can be a sign of disrespect, disengagement, or even hostility.
Like they're subtly communicating their disdain, even if their words are saying something totally different.
Now let's move on to body posture. How we hold ourselves can convey confidence, insecurity, or even dominance. Someone standing tall, shoulders back, head held high, projects confidence and assertiveness.
Like they're owning their space, commanding attention.
Right. And then someone who slouches, shoulders slumped, head down, might convey insecurity or submissiveness, like they're trying to make themselves smaller, less noticeable.
So posture can tell us a lot about someone's self-esteem and even their social status.
Absolutely. Pay attention to how people carry themselves. Their posture can give you clues about their emotional state and how confident they are. Now let's talk about hand gestures. Our hands are so expressive, they can add emphasis, clarity, or even contradict what we're saying.
I've never really thought much about hand gestures before, but I can see how they could be really revealing.
Open hand gestures with palms facing up usually convey honesty, openness, a willingness to connect, like they're showing you their cards, inviting trust and transparency. But closed hand gestures, palms down or fists clenched, often convey defensiveness, aggression, or a desire to control.
So open hands are approachable and closed hands are more guarded or hostile.
Exactly. And then there's the steeple, where the fingertips are pressed together, forming a triangle. That one's often associated with confidence, authority, a sense of knowing.
Like they're gathering their thoughts, focusing their energy, projecting expertise.
Pay attention to how people use their hands when they talk. It can tell you a lot about their emotional state, how engaged they are, even their intentions.
Wow, it's amazing how much information we can get from those little hand movements.
Now let's talk about one of the most revealing aspects of nonverbal communication: eye contact. They don't call eyes the windows to the soul for nothing. Eye contact can convey confidence, trustworthiness, a desire to connect.
It's like they're locking eyes with you, making a connection, inviting you into their world.
And avoiding eye contact, well, that can convey nervousness, insecurity, or even deception.
Like they're hiding their eyes, shielding their emotions, maybe even signaling that they're not being truthful.
Of course, we have to remember that different cultures have different norms about eye contact.
That's true. We don't want to misinterpret someone just because of cultural differences.
Another thing to watch for is pupil dilation. When we're interested in something or someone, our pupils tend to get bigger.
It's like our eyes widen with interest, showing attraction, curiosity, even arousal.
And when we're bored, disinterested, or even disgusted, our pupils constrict, getting smaller.
Like our eyes are narrowing with disapproval.
It's hard to control pupil dilation consciously, so it can be a good indicator of someone's true feelings.
Wow, that's fascinating. I'm going to be paying a lot more attention to people's pupils from now on.
Now let's move on to proxemics, which is the study of personal space and how we use it to communicate. We all have those invisible bubbles of personal space, right?
Yeah, and the size of that bubble can change depending on the situation and who we're with.
Exactly. We tend to stand closer to people we like or trust, and farther away from people we dislike or feel uncomfortable around.
It's like our bodies are naturally drawn to those we feel good around and create distance from those who make us feel uneasy.
Right. The closer we stand, the more intimate the interaction feels. The farther away, the more formal and distant.
So physical closeness can tell us a lot about the relationship between two people. What about territoriality? I know I can get a little possessive of my favorite chair at home.
Oh, territoriality is fascinating. We often claim certain spaces as our own, our home, our office, even our spot at the table. And when someone invades our territory, we can feel uncomfortable, maybe even threatened.
It's like they're violating our personal space.
Exactly. Pay attention to how people react when you enter their space or when they enter yours. It can tell you a lot about their boundaries, their comfort levels, and even their potential for aggression.
Like they're sending us signals with their body language, telling us to come closer or back off.
Now, let's explore haptics, which is the study of touch. Touch is a powerful form of communication. It can convey so many emotions, from love and affection to comfort and support.
Yeah, different kinds of touch definitely send different messages. A pat on the back can be encouraging, while a firm handshake can be, confident and authoritative.
Right. Be mindful of how people touch you and how you touch them. It can reveal a lot about your relationship, your comfort levels, and even your intentions. But it's crucial to be respectful of personal boundaries and cultural differences.
Oh, absolutely. What's considered friendly in one culture might be seen as intrusive or inappropriate in another.
Exactly. Always be aware of those cultural nuances and err on the side of caution when it comes to physical contact. Wow, this exploration of nonverbal communication has been really eye-opening.
It's amazing how much we say without even opening our mouths.
By becoming more attuned to these subtle cues, we can understand ourselves and others better, improve our communication, and navigate those tricky social situations with more awareness.
It's like unlocking a secret language, the language of our bodies. But I have a question. Can we apply these lie detection principles to written communication too?
Absolutely. We usually think of lie detection in, face-to-face conversations, but the written word can also reveal a lot about someone's truthfulness.
So emails, texts, social media posts, even formal documents, those can hold clues too.
Exactly. And one of the key principles is, just like with in-person interactions, to look for inconsistencies. Liars have a hard time keeping their stories straight, and those slip-ups can show up in their writing too.
So like if someone says they were somewhere at a certain time, but their emails or texts say something different, that's a red flag.
Exactly. It's like their digital footprint betrays them, leaving behind evidence that's hard to erase. Another important principle is paying attention to detail. When someone's being truthful, they tend to provide more specifics, times, dates, locations, conversations.
And liars tend to keep things vague, right? Avoiding those specifics that could be easily disproven.
You got it. It's like they're painting a blurry picture, leaving out the details that could give them away.
What about the language itself? Are there certain ways that liars use language?
You bet. For instance, they often use evasive language. They avoid direct answers, hedge their statements, and use qualifiers to soften their claims.
Like instead of saying I was at the library, they might say, I think I was at the library, or I might have been at the library.
Exactly. It's all about creating ambiguity, leaving room for doubt so they can avoid making a definite statement that could be challenged.
What about using a lot of negative words? I've noticed that sometimes when people lie, they use a lot of no or not.
You're onto something there. Liars often use negation to distance themselves from their lies. It's like a psychological buffer between them and the truth.
So like instead of saying, I went to the store, they might say, I didn't not go to the store.
Exactly. It's subtle, but it can be a sign of deception. Another thing to look for is what we call distancing language. Liars will often use impersonal language to avoid taking responsibility.
Like instead of I made a mistake, they'll say mistakes were made.
Right. They're trying to fade into the background, become less accountable. By paying attention to these language patterns, you can become a much better lie detector, even in written communication.
It's like learning a whole new language, the language of lies.
Now, let's talk about a really tricky type of lie. The lie of omission. Outright lies are when someone says something false, but lies of omission are about leaving out crucial information that would change the whole story.
It's like they're showing you a cropped photo, cutting out the parts they don't want you to see.
Exactly. And one of the problems with lies of omission is that they can be really hard to prove. With a regular lie, you can often find evidence that contradicts it, but with a lie of omission, you're dealing with the absence of information.
So how can we even tell if someone's using a lie of omission?
Well, one clue is a sudden change in topic. If they quickly change the subject when you ask a specific question, it could mean they're trying to hide something.
Like slamming on the brakes in the conversation to avoid a dangerous topic.
Another clue is vague or evasive answers. If they give you a non-answer or an answer that doesn't really address your question, they might be withholding information.
Right. It's like a smokescreen of words hiding the truth.
Can nonverbal cues help us spot lies of omission? Absolutely. When someone's being truthful, they usually make good eye contact, have an open posture, and use their hands in a way that supports what they're saying. But when someone's using a lie of omission, they might avoid eye contact, fidget, or use closed body language that contradicts their words.
So we're looking for those inconsistencies between their words and their body.
Right. Another thing to watch for is a change in their usual behavior. If they suddenly become more nervous, defensive, or withdrawn when you ask certain questions, that could be a sign they're hiding something.
Like their whole demeanor changes.
Exactly. So spotting lies of omission takes careful observation, a bit of healthy skepticism, and a willingness to, dig a little deeper.
We have to ask the right questions, pay attention to both words and body language, and trust our gut when something feels off.
That's it. And remember, lies of omission can be just as damaging as outright lies. By learning how to spot them, you can protect yourself from being misled and make better decisions.
This is so helpful. We've really covered a lot today, From the 5 principles to nonverbal cues and those tricky lies of omission, it's clear that being a good lie detector takes knowledge, observation, and critical thinking.
And this is really just the beginning. There's a whole world of lie detection out there to explore.
We'll be continuing our exploration in part 3, where we'll take a look at specific types of lies, like white lies, lies of betrayal, and those really tough to spot lies of fabrication. So, stay tuned. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on quite the adventure exploring, the world of lie detection.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From the 5 principles to nonverbal cues, we even tackled those tricky lies of omission.
It's been really fascinating to uncover all those hidden layers of communication and learn how to, become more aware of how people behave. But before we wrap up, I have this one question that's been bugging me.
Go ahead, what is it?
Can we actually, train ourselves to get better at spotting lies? Is it a skill you can develop, or are some people just, naturally better at it than others?
Well, the good news is you can definitely train yourself to become a better lie detector. It's not some kind of magical ability that only a few people have.
That's a relief. So how do we actually go about, sharpening our lie detecting senses?
One of the most effective ways is simply to practice. Just put yourself out there and start paying closer attention to people.
So being more mindful in our everyday interactions, not just, watching, but actually analyzing what we see and hear.
Exactly. Pay attention to things like their body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, and whether their stories are consistent. Look for those little inconsistencies and any changes in their usual behavior.
It's like we're becoming detectives in our own
Yeah.
lives, right? Searching for clues. What else can we do besides practice?
Well, another really helpful thing is to study the research. There's a ton of information out there about the psychology of lying, those nonverbal cues that give people away, and the language patterns liars tend to use.
So we can actually learn the science behind lying.
Exactly. By immersing yourself in that research, you can get a much deeper understanding of how liars think and operate, making you more attuned to their tricks.
It's like a crash course in lie detection. Are there any other strategies we can use?
Don't underestimate the power of feedback. Ask your friends, family, or colleagues for their honest opinions about your lie detection skills.
Oh, like a second opinion?
Exactly. Ask them if they think you're too trusting, too skeptical, or if you're good at reading people. Their feedback can help you figure out your weaknesses and improve your approach.
So it's all about constant learning and improvement.
That's it. Becoming a better lie detector is a journey, not a destination. It takes time, effort, and a willingness to keep learning. But with practice, study, and feedback, you can definitely sharpen those lie detecting senses and navigate the world with more confidence.
This has been incredibly helpful. I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for understanding people. But before we finish, I'd love to touch on a few specific types of lies we haven't really talked about yet.
Sure, let's do that. What did you have in mind?
Well, what about white lies? The ones people tell with good intentions to avoid hurting someone's feelings or starting a conflict. But can they still be harmful?
That's a good question. While they may seem harmless, white lies can actually damage trust and lead to bigger deceptions down the road.
It's like that saying, a little lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes.
Exactly. Even small lies can have, unintended consequences. So how do we deal with these tricky white lies?
Well, one thing you can do is be really honest with yourself about why you're telling the lie. Is it really to protect someone's feelings, or are you just trying to avoid an awkward situation?
So being self-aware about our motivations.
Right. And think about whether there are other ways to say what you need to say. Can you be honest in a way that's both truthful and kind?
It's about finding that balance between honesty and kindness.
Exactly. And remember, even if your intentions are good, white lies can still create confusion and erode trust, like a tiny seed of doubt that can grow into something bigger over time. Now, what about lies of betrayal? Those are particularly painful because they involve broken promises and shattered trust, often with people we love.
You're right. Those can be incredibly damaging. They can break relationships and leave, lasting scars.
So how do we even begin to deal with that kind of betrayal?
Well, the first step is to acknowledge the pain. Don't try to downplay it or pretend it doesn't hurt. Let yourself grieve the loss of trust. and process the damage that's been done.
It's about letting ourselves feel the hurt, not pushing those emotions away.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to reach out for support. Talk to someone you trust, a friend, a family member, or even a therapist. Having a good support system can make a huge difference.
It's a reminder that we don't have to go through this alone. Now, sometimes it might be important to actually confront the person who betrayed you.
Yeah, that can be a tough conversation, but it gives you a chance to express how you feel, understand why they did what they did, and hold them accountable.
It's about standing up for yourself, demanding respect, and not letting the betrayal just slide. But I imagine those conversations can get pretty heated.
They definitely can. So approach the conversation carefully. They might not be ready to hear what you have to say or take responsibility. And if things get too intense or unproductive, it might be best to walk away and seek support elsewhere.
That's good advice. It's about protecting ourselves and not getting caught in a fight that's going nowhere. What about forgiveness? Is that even possible after a betrayal?
Forgiveness is a really powerful tool for healing, but it's important to remember that forgiveness doesn't mean you're condoning what they did or forgetting the pain. It's about letting go of the anger and resentment you're carrying.
It's about choosing to move on.
Right. Forgiveness is a choice, and it's not always easy. It takes time. Be patient with yourself and let yourself heal at your own pace. Okay, now let's talk about a type of lie that can be incredibly difficult to detect, the lie of fabrication.
Lies of fabrication are like whole made-up stories, right? The liar creates this whole fake narrative, often with lots of details and a convincing performance.
That's right. And they can be very persuasive, especially when told by someone who knows how to manipulate emotions and spin a good yarn.
So how can we even spot these masterfully crafted lies?
Even the best liars make mistakes. One thing to look for is inconsistencies in their stories. Do the dates and times add up? Do their details contradict each other? Has their story changed over time? Any of these could be signs they're not being truthful.
So it's about paying close attention to the details and looking for those cracks in their story. What about their emotions? Can those give us clues?
Oh, definitely. Liars often feel anxious, guilty, or even excited when they're telling their made-up stories, and those emotions can leak out in their body language, fidgeting, avoiding eye contact, or changes in their voice.
It's like their body's giving them away, even though they're trying to stay in control. Are there any other ways to spot these lies of fabrication?
Think about their motivation. Why would they make up this lie? What are they hoping to gain? Understanding their motivation can help you decide whether their story is believable.
So we're kind of playing detective, right? Looking for a motive.
Exactly. Another thing you can do is look for evidence to support their claims. If they're telling the truth, there should be some proof, right? Can they provide witnesses, documents, or anything else that backs up their story?
So if they can't back it up, that's a big problem.
Absolutely. It's like their story has no foundation. To spot lies of fabrication, you need to be skeptical, think critically, and pay close attention.
We have to question everything, analyze those details, and trust our gut feeling.
That's it. And remember, these lies can be really harmful. They can ruin trust, damage relationships, and create all sorts of chaos. By learning to recognize those subtle signs, you can protect yourself and make better choices.
This entire deep dive into lie detection has been amazing. We've learned about the psychology of deception, how to read body language, and how to ask the right questions.
We've learned how to become more observant, how to deal with manipulators, and how to protect ourselves from those who would try to deceive us.
And most importantly, I think, we've learned to trust our instincts, question everything, and seek the truth.
Remember, knowledge is power when it comes to lie detection. Use what you've learned to become more aware, more observant, and more confident in your ability to see the truth.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep practicing, keep learning, and keep asking questions. You'll be amazed at how much you can discover.
Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and always keep searching for the truth.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.